Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm your host, Peter Dixon, and this is Season 6, Episode 30. My very special guest, Arthur Klym. How are you, Arthur?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Peter. How's things with you?
Going very well. Very hot over here. No doubt very cold where you are.
Yes, it's pretty chilly. It's above freezing, but not by a lot.
Hey, it's great to have you back on the program. I loved our last interview. And what we're going to do today is basically a two-part interview discussing Fred Veltman's commissioned, is that the right word, report and study into Ellen White's borrowing, particularly from Desire of Ages. That's where they ended up focusing on 15 chapters there. And we're going to get into that very soon. I just want to give a quick plug for two people that have been on the program before. And then we're going to get right into it. And everyone, thanks for joining us too. I don't know how many people are watching because for some reason the numbers are not coming through, but that's all right. So first up, thank you very much to Brian S. Newman, who sent me a copy of The White Elephant. He and I did an interview on this very book a few weeks ago, and I had to borrow a copy because I couldn't find one online, and he sent me one. So thank you, Brian. I'm looking forward to my third read-through of this fantastic book. And also our good friend Gillian Ford has been working tirelessly on this series, and she is now at volume 6, Desmond Ford. I think all the other volumes have been called On the Road to Glacier View, and this one's just Glacier View. And this is the not for sale sample copy. Boy, I feel very special. Thank you, Gillian. And when this is available, we'll have an interview and we'll really give it a plug. Now, before we start, Arthur, and I'm going to kind of just throw you straight into it, I just wanted to talk about, now this is Jerry Gladson's book. He has a new title of it. Can you remember what he changed the title to? It's more like Leaving Adventism than A Theologian's Journey. I can't remember what the latest version is. Fantastic book. I'll find out. Maybe someone watching can let me know as well. That'd be great. So this is basically the public statement from the church at the end of this 8-year study by Fred Veltman. And I want to talk about this and why you think they kind of minimized any thorough public outing of the work. So this was their one paragraph that pretty much made it to the world. We'll talk about where they did release the information, and it was pretty hard to come by. I think it even cost money, but we'll chat about that. But I'm pretty sure people had to pay for it. Here we go. This is the official public statement about the 5-year study. The 8-year study of Ellen G. White's possible borrowing of materials from other writings for her book, The Desire of Ages, ended this year with researcher Fred Veltman's concluding that her book does contain some ideas and phrasing similar to those of other writers, but that it is independent of verbatim borrowing. So, and I just find that quite profound, because obviously they're trying to say nothing to see here. And when I read this book and I read that paragraph, the seed was planted a few years ago. I thought one day I'm going to do a full 2 or 3 part interview with someone on this topic. And I want to say a big thank you to Robert Lindbeck, who was going to be joining us ages back. We'd chatted about it, and he is otherwise occupied. And then Arthur, you and I met, and we did our interview, and we chatted about this topic, and the seed that was planted is now finally about to bear fruit. We hope. So tell us a bit of background to yourself, and then this Fred Veltman study. Over to you, Arthur.
All right. Well, I was born and raised Seventh-day Adventist. I went to I'd say 2.5 years of Adventist church school for grade school, 4 years of Adventist academy, and 4 years of Adventist college. I was a history major, but I had a religion minor because I loved religion classes so much. And then I went on to 3 years of law school, and I've been practicing law. Well, I don't practice law anymore, but I've been in the legal profession for 46 years. So, but I left the church probably in the middle 80s. We spent 7, 8, 9 years in a Lutheran congregation before we finished the slide out the door completely. But I still find fascinating what's going on in the Adventist church. There was a big gap of years where I lost track of everything that was going on, but COVID sort of helped stir my interest up again because there were a lot of online sessions that you could attend. Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar was one of them. That's very good, and I still go there now and again. I've missed a few lately, but I find that very interesting. It's surprising to me how often people are welcoming, even though you're not part of the fold anymore, and even though you're not even a believer anymore. It's interesting. I find the Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar is very welcoming, and there are several people there that I've met there have become online friends. George Tishy is attending today, and
he's watching today. Hey, George.
I always enjoy seeing George and hearing him talk. I go to occasionally, or quite often, I'll go to the Sligo Faith and Reason Sabbath School and just lurk there. I don't say anything there except in the chat. I do say a lot now and again at the Adventist Today Sabbath Seminar. So
that's good. That's good. Hey, Adrian has just written. Thank you, Adrian. He's just written the book here. The Jerry Gladson book is now titled Out of Adventism, which is a much better title than A Theologian's Journey from Seventh-day Adventism to Mainstream Christianity. But it's a fabulous book. Highly recommend that. Out of Adventism. Thank you, Adrian Anderson, for all your great work and for helping us with that title. So,
I might add, Peter, that Ellen White's always been a real interest of mine. I read probably most of the volumes of Arthur White's biography of Ellen White when it came out, and I had read earlier the Ron Numbers Prophetess of Health, which is
fascinating,
quite an excellent book. I've of course read The White Lie when it came out, and The White Truth, which came out just before it. I've followed Robert Brinsmead closely in his evangelical and then road out to atheism journey. His material I found fascinating. So.
Isn't Adventism is equally fascinating to Mormonism to watch? I don't find Jehovah's Witnesses that interesting, or Scientology or Christian Science for some reason, but Adventism and Mormonism are like, you can't take your eyes off the very interesting storyline.
And we've mentioned before, Peter, I think you've watched or listened to many episodes of Mormon Stories by John Glenn. It's a terrific podcast. And I find, I don't listen to everyone, but I listen to, maybe a couple a week. They're very, very good. And I see some real similarities as you do.
Yeah.
And Joseph Smith was, as they would say, martyred in 1844. So they have there's a connection too.
That's right. Well, and someone said recently that Ellen White's sister-in-law was related to Joseph Smith, or there's some connection. I don't know. Apparently one of his visions that she's borrowed reasonably extensively from. Anyway, let's get into Fred Veltman. Oh, one last quick plug. Last week, lately, for some reason, I've been saying how much I appreciate people donating, and because it just helps me to keep putting programs on. And 3 weeks ago, there was, I think, $25, and then I can't remember the week after. But this last week, I really needed to buy a new chair. I never have a back problem, but I was getting this really sore back and hips, and I thought, it's my chair. So I found one for $50, but the one I really wanted was $150. And that's exactly how much money came through in my last week. So I now have a very comfortable new chair with armrests.
Wow.
So thank you, everyone, for making that possible and saving my back. Appreciate it. Okay, on to Fred Veltman. Tell us all about how the church kind of decided to do this very interesting study.
Well, the church kind of got, well, it might not be fair to say they were dragged kicking and screaming into it, but it was a necessity, and they realized it was. When Walter Ray began to publicize his work and to share his work with others, showing how this great amount of dependency by Ellen White on other authors, the church was concerned about it. And they had this Prexad meeting, this executive committee that Neil Wilson, the then president of the General Conference, convened in Southern California, and several luminaries were there. Walter Ray presented his material, and there's a recording of it. And you've told me before you'd like to get a copy of it. I have one somewhere. There's a recording of that, of some of the sessions, but I haven't found it yet. Walter Ray presented his material, and they admitted at the end of it that most of the members of the committee, even Robert Olson, who was then, I believe he was in the Secretary of the White Estate, or at least the assistant, he succeeded Arthur White. He admitted that it was, the evidence was stronger than they had thought. And so they determined that a scholar should be appointed to study it. Somebody who would take a scholarly approach and not the more popular approach that Walter Ray took. And initially they talked about appointing James Cox. And there's sort of a famous letter, which I couldn't find. I ran across it in the last few weeks, and then I didn't save where it was, but there was a letter that was written, I think, by Robert Olson to someone else involved at the White Estate, saying they thought that they could stay close to Jim Cox and kind of control where he went with it. And then later they said, "Oh, that was just unfortunate wording. We didn't really mean it that way."
Oh, and you got a copy of that letter, did you say?
I have it somewhere, and I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm always saying I've got this someplace.
Maybe by tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll look for it some more. I ran across it online in the last 2 weeks, and then Jim Cox got called, I think, to the presidency of Avondale.
That's right. I was literally about to say he showed up here that very next year.
So he became unavailable. And so their next choice was Fred Veltman, who was the chair, I believe, at that time of the Department of Religion at PUC, Pacific Union College. And I think he was a little later in his career, and they decided he would be a good one to select to do a study. Initially, the idea was that they were going to do a study of all of the Desire of Ages, I believe, but that was just way too much. That was very unrealistic. And so what was decided by Veltman, and I assume some others on this advisory committee, to choose 15 chapters out of is it 87? At any rate, or maybe it's 85, but to pick 15 chapters, which they did by going to the math department. And I think they divided it into 3 types of chapters and had the math department use, just pick them by random, with the magic of mathematics. So they did that, and those are what they chose to study. Veltman got a large number of volunteers to help him, at least a significant number of volunteers, and who were to do the actual combing through the documents. They had the copies of Ellen White's published works, but Veltman went back to the White Estate and combed through and scanned a large number of unpublished works, letters, the like. Ellen White liked to write in scrapbooks, so to speak, where she would write down things as they occurred to her, or as she said, she had come out of a vision, maybe in the morning or in the evening, she'd wake up and write these things down, or some other time when she thought that it would something came to her. She did not just sit down and write The Desire of Ages. From everything I can find, they compiled a large number of writings from various places where she had written articles for the Review and Herald, or had these scrapbooks, or even letters to people, and found Marian Davis, who was the primary helper for her, found, compiled and collated all these things, and they kind of pulled them together. I think Ellen White wrote, from what I understand, she wrote some additional material to fill in the gaps, but reading through some of the material from Marian Davis, she says things like, the opening of these few chapters is not good, it's boring, it doesn't work, and she rewrote those openings to make them more interesting and make them more compelling to pull people in. But at any rate, backing up a little bit, Veltman, undertook this study, and I have to tell you that I cheated a little bit on this, Peter. The study itself, I believe, is 2,500 or 2,600 and some pages. That is just an overwhelming bite to take.
Yeah,
if you go to the report, and you can find it online in the Adventist archives, or you could go to probably any of the Adventist universities around the world. They would have a copy of it. But it's just overwhelming to sit down and work your way through it. I tried some of that and went to various parts of it. The analysis itself is really boring.
Yeah.
The conclusions of the analysis are very good. Having said that, the way that I cheated, and a way that I would recommend to all of you, and someone who I think would be a very good guest on your show, is a former theology professor whose name is Warren Trenchard. He wrote a book. He did a condensed version of the Veltman report, and here it is. It says The Desire of Ages and its Sources. There we go. I'm not holding this very well. Down below there on the bottom corner, it says Condensed Edition of Life of Christ Research Report by Fred Veltman. Warren Trenchard's report, if you count the bibliography at the back, is 248 pages. Now, one of the reasons it's much less is because it's this kind of style. Veltman's report was double-spaced, typewritten, and a fairly large typeface. I think, thinking back to the days when I learned how to type and I used a manual typewriter, I think it's more like pica font, fairly good size. And so it's page after page after page, and he wrote with this isn't meant as a criticism, but sort of a scholarly style that isn't necessarily designed to pull the reader in.
Do you think that he did that a little bit on purpose, though? Like you say, it's not a criticism of the scholarly style, but it's definitely, if someone goes, look, I'm going to ramp this scholarly method up a little bit because I don't want people to read it. Do you think that ever crossed his mind?
Oh, I think it probably did. I don't know that. I wonder if it was intentional. I don't have any way of knowing. But it's interesting. You read that material about the Veltman report a few moments ago. Where did that come from? Did that come out of Ministry Magazine?
I think it was Adventist Review. Yes. The General Church paper, the Adventist Review, downplayed his revealing conclusions. Sandwiched between a report on some independent ministries and the Adventist health system, there is this misleading comment, and that's the paragraph I read. So Adventist Review.
And it is misleading.
Incredible.
Trenchard, though he was he grew up in Adventist schools. He got his PhD from the University of Chicago, went to Indiana Academy, Andrews University, where he got his BA, his MA, and BD. But then he went on to the University of Chicago. When I mentioned the book to my wife and told her about it, she said, that name sounds familiar. I said, well, there's a reason for it. And that is, well, she was a student at the academy there, and she didn't know this gentleman, but he was just starting to teach there at Canadian Union College, which is now called Burman University. It's in Lacombe, Alberta, or College Heights, actually, but it's Lacombe, Alberta, which is about halfway between Edmonton and Calgary. If anyone wants to put the map in their mind's eye, that's where it's located. And they have at that school, and still they had, and they still do, as far as I know, a boarding academy as well as the college or university. And so he started his career teaching there. He ended up down at La Sierra University, where he worked for a long time. He had been a university provost there. He was the director of their graduate programs there. He's from all appearances, he's a very sharp person, and no reason to think anything else. And having read his book, I'm more firmly entrenched in that view. It'd be pretty arrogant of me, who doesn't have anything beyond in religion other than a minor in religion. It'd be pretty arrogant of me to think that I could judge his work. But I've been around the block a few times, and I can tell when somebody writes well and is, I think, very honest in his approach.
And the Veltman report, as you say, was about 2,500 pages. This one, did you say, is about 230, something like that?
With the bibliography, it's 248.
And then the actual Fred Veltman conclusion and summary is about 2.5 pages, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Veltman had, and this is somewhat odd, he had 2 different introductions, which is strange. And I think Trenchard, if I remember correctly, sort of combined them.
And also, I'll just quickly bring onto the screen the book there, The Desire of Ages and its Sources. And sometimes it's hard to find online the full version, because sometimes it's listed as Desire of Ages and sometimes Life of Christ Research Project Report. Right. And I think that's another little bit of a way to keep people off the scent as well. Having a couple of, like you say, introductions and a couple of titles for the report itself.
In the beginning, in the preface to his book, Trenchard, in a footnote, makes a fascinating comment. One of the people who was involved in doing some of the real groundwork or real searching in the Desire of Ages and doing some of the real comparison work was a woman named Nancy LaCourte. She's down at PUC. I don't know much about her. I know she's a stalwart down there, and I know that she runs a Sabbath school class down there. I think they call it the PUC Choir Sabbath School, something like that. I've been to it a few times, and it's a pretty open-minded crowd. And he said there's something he put in here in the footnote, and I assume that she doesn't mind this being known, or I doubt he would have put it in. But what he said is this. He said, in an email, November 12, 2022, Nancy told me that before Veltman died in 2006, he had a phone conversation with her uncle, his friend Fred Hoyt, during which he asked Hoyt to make sure that his work on Ellen White's sources was made available to those who wanted to see it. He urged, quote, "Don't let them hide it away," end of quote. So one of the things that Trenchard said here says it seems that Veltman would have approved of these efforts.
Yes.
And so I thought that really caught my eye. It'd be very easy to miss because it's in this tiny little footnote.
Yes. Wow.
But fascinating. Very
and
fascinating.
another little flag that just shows you've got to be careful of the machine trying to hide this kind of material.
Yes, I've read several comments about various authors who pointed out Ellen White's borrowings. I've read things that the White Estate has put out, and they do downplay and underplay, and I think misstate what was found. For instance, I found this one. I printed out this one document called Ellen G. White and the so-called plagiarism charge, an examination of 5 issues. This is from revised in April 30 of 1999 and it was by Roger W. Kuhn, who was, I think, an associate secretary of the White Estate. And he is very much an apologist for Ellen White. For instance, to give you an example of how they overplay and underplay things. He's setting forth several dates where various people have come out and pointed out Ellen's borrowings. And he says in 1976, Dr. Ronald L. Numbers viciously attacked the prophet in his Ellen G. White, Prophetess of Health. You've read that book, Peter.
I love
Did you read that as a vicious attack?
No, the opposite.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It was kind, I thought, even. It was very
and very
fair.
factual. It was as if he was like we were chatting about Matthew Lucio just off air.
Yeah.
Who's actually watching today. Hi, Matthew. Loved our chat the other day. By the way, have you got any podcasts on Fred Veltman? Let me know. But he also is able to kind of a historian just presents the material and leaves it up for the reader to draw the conclusions.
Yeah,
I found Ron Numbers' book very much like that.
Oh, I think so. I speaking of Matthew Lucio, I kind of wish we'd put this session off for a few more weeks because I don't like to be so close in time to his, because he's so much better, so much better at communicating he has a sense of humor while getting across really valuable material. And he can recite it so clearly. I would like him to let you know, so you can share with us when he does have his heresy trial. I'd like to see if I could attend it. So
it'll be online for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. Veltman starts out, Trenchard starts out, and this is condensed from Veltman's report, but here, just to pick up a few quotes from it, he says, whenever the officers of the White Estate, as well as Nickel, F.D. Nickel, and Jemison, conceded Ellen White's literary indebtedness, they minimized its extent. I mean, that's something Veltman points out very clearly. They minimized its extent. Nickel claimed that if the little she borrowed were deleted, it would scarcely affect the total of the writings, and it certainly wouldn't affect the quality and the force of the message. He says she borrowed the little she did with no attempt to deceive, and for reasons which she clearly stated. Veltman goes on and quotes from some other places that I think are important. He says, he does say Adventists had long known about Ellen White's quotations from historians and other sources in Great Controversy and sketches from the life of Paul, but claims a source used in the Desire of Ages was unwelcome and troubling. He says that the project wasn't designed to establish the fact that she used the writing of others in producing her books. That point, he says, could not be denied. But he said literary parallels have been found in her testimonies as well, and in the recounting of her visions. That wasn't the point of his study, and he did not go into those, but it is, in fact, he acknowledges that she used sources in her visions. Yeah. Now, people might say, and if she were here today to defend herself, I'm very confident she would say, well, I just saw these things that just matched perfectly what God had showed me in vision about these people.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Because yes, she would say that, and it is what a lot of Adventists in the pews say as well. As the information filters down to them, they very much say, "Oh, well, she was just guided to these things that stated more clearly what she had seen in vision." What would be your answer to that? And did Fred have an answer to that?
Fred, I don't think ever really said, or Dr. Veltman, I don't know, ever really said, "Oh, she was lying." But I think she was. I mean, let's just be straight out with it. I think she was. Either that, or she was very adept at fooling herself. And some people will think that this is being unduly critical of her. I think it's a defense of her. Remember that when she was very young, she suffered a traumatic brain injury. I don't know that we fully understand what that can do to people. And I was reading some materials about traumatic brain injuries, and it exhibits in some people through a real fixation on religious matters. So, now, am I saying she's crazy? No, I don't. I think that I don't have the knowledge to say something like that. But it's hard for me to believe that she didn't realize she was copying from other people. I just can't buy that. And when she was married to James White, obviously they were married until he died.
Mm.
James White wrote, he said, if commentators and he wrote about her works. He said in her published, this is from Veltman's report. In her published works, there are many things set forth which cannot be found in other books, and yet they are so clear and beautiful that the unprejudiced mind grasps them at once as truth. And he goes on and says, these men, these commentators and theological writers, says, gather thoughts from books. And as Mrs. White has written and spoken 100 things as truthful as they are beautiful and harmonizes, which cannot be found in the writing of others. They are new to the most intelligent readers and hearers. And if they are not to be found in print and are not brought out in sermons from the pulpit, where did Mrs. White find them? From what source has she received the new and rich thoughts which are to be found in her writings and oral addresses? She could not have learned them from books, from the fact that they do not contain such thoughts. The case is a clear one. It evidently requires 100 times the credulity to believe that Mrs. White has learned these things of others and has palmed them off as visions from God than it does to believe that the Spirit of God has revealed them to her. Now, I'll tell the flip side of the coin.
And that was that James White that wrote that?
James White. That's from James White, Life Sketches, 1880, page 80, pages 80 and pages 328 to 329. And I went and looked it up to make sure it was really there, because the E.G. White Estate, or the whiteestate.org, does have, you can find material there, even the letters, and it's very helpful. And I appreciate how they have opened up so much more than they used to. But that's what he said, and I'm sure what a defender of Ellen White would say. Well, she got the words, but she made a different point with them, and she didn't follow their ideas. She followed their words. That's really one of the primary defense of her. She made things out of them that they didn't make out of them. That's what they would say. Now, Veltman goes on and said he raises the question, and a fair one. He says, it's pointed out that he was one who had profited from her and has viewed her as a prophet for years, and he questioned, he says literature claiming inspiration must be read in the context of an attitude of faith. And he acknowledged that it's difficult. It would be a difficult process for him to go through this. And I think that may be part of why they didn't compare even the ideas so much as the words, the content less than the words themselves, the sentences. They chose the unit of measurement, their unit of comparison, as the sentence. And they went through and tried to find sentences. Some of the sentences were exact quotes. Others were, a little bit of change, the way a seventh grader might write a report about a person, go on Wikipedia and change a few words, massage this there so it doesn't look quite so obvious. Something, and I'm probably jumping way ahead of myself here, but as I began to read this, something that occurred to me, I thought it's interesting that the White Estate, when they were concerned about defending the idea of plagiarism, they hired a lawyer, someone who was an expert in copyright law, to give them an opinion, to write an opinion letter about Ellen White's quote plagiarism. And they said, we want this man to tell us this. And I saw they said he put in 300 hours and reviewed 1,000 cases. And I stopped and thought about that a little bit. I thought, and he said, they said he also read The Great Controversy. And I'm thinking 300 hours, 1,000 cases, and read The Great Controversy. If you start breaking that down to how much time per case and how much time to read Ellen White, I'm a lawyer. I know how somebody wants me to write a letter of opinion. It helps to know what they want me to say.
Yeah.
And I've read a lot of these cases before, and so I just cite them. Or I find something where I've written an article or an opinion before for somebody, and I just kind of pull them over. And that's likely what he did.
Is that Ramick?
Vincent Ramick. So when they wanted to defend her legally on the issue of plagiarism, they went to a non-Adventist, a Roman Catholic, actually, copyright lawyer. When they wanted to decide or find how much copying Ellen White used, they went to a literature expert. Oh no, they didn't go to a literature expert. They went to a theologian. What I wondered about, and this is maybe a weak criticism, but if you want to know whether somebody copied or engaged in copying of materials from someone else, and you're not as concerned about the content as you are the fact that it was done, maybe you should go to somebody who's an expert in that field, maybe to somebody who's an editor or an English expert. Right now, it would be a lot easier. And what I would love to see, I don't think it'll ever happen, and I don't have the knowledge or the ability to do it myself, but with all of the software that's available now, and there are lots of software programs out there that are used by major universities and by others to check for plagiarism, that you could scan all of the materials of Ellen White are available in digital format. You could put those in a digital database. You could put all of those writings from these people, these writers of Jesus biographies back in the 19th century, and you could run a comparison, and those software programs will tell you whether or not somebody's plagiarizing or copying, or even it can spot rephrasing of the material. You know, when I was in college, I wasn't as serious a student as I might have been, and the one paper I wrote for freshman composition, they had you write different types of essays about using different formats or genres. And there was one where I wrote a story about my roommate that the teacher thought was, well, she gave it a very good grade, and used it with some people as an example of this is what this kind of genre is. Well, a year later, a fellow came to our room in the dorm and said, "Hey, can I look at some of your papers to see what what you guys did with these types of things?" Well, I'd let him look at my papers, and what I didn't realize, and because I would have warned him, because I would have known, first of all, it'd be wrong, but second of all, he had the same teacher. He was going to be caught. He copied my paper, changed some of the names, and as a result,
wow.
You might wonder, maybe he should have had some apologists who came in and said, he had the same idea and he just borrowed his words to express it. But no, he got an F for that course, and he had to take it over again. We take those kinds of things seriously now.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think back then they try and downplay, copyright wasn't as, but I'm pretty sure it was just the publishing of overseas books that was different back then, where you could be in America and publish a book that was released in the UK and there was no copyright, but you'd still have the person's name and the full book. But
and there was something from the Review and Herald, and that I think Uriah Smith wrote a scathing rebuke, somebody borrowing others' work and saying you need to give credit. Well, if he knew that, you think she might have known that.
And also the Connie Bear Howson episode. Is that available online to find to confirm that story? Because I've heard recently various Adventist apologists say, that never happened.
Yes, some do say that. I think what they're saying never happened is that there was a threat of a lawsuit. Now, A.G. Daniels in the 1919 Bible Conference says there was, but
he refers to Connie Bear and Howson in that, doesn't he?
And he says there was a threat of a lawsuit, but there is a letter that the White Estate has from the publishers of that book, I think some years later, maybe in the late 20s or early 30s, saying, well, it wasn't really copyrighted, and then, you know, we never threatened to sue anybody, but it was many years after the event, and frankly, I kind of doubt whether or not there was an institutional the institutional memory survived. So let's see.
And just to what you were saying before, with computer programming now with AI, I'm sure you could get an AI kind of app to go through all of Ellen White's writings, and then, or even just Desire of Ages, even just pick the Desire of Ages, and then Fred lists the 10 authors that she borrows from. Primarily Hannah, I think, is the main one.
The biggest.
You could, even if you just went through those, Desire of Ages and Hannah's book, I think, was it called Life of Christ or something like that? Is it William?
Yes, Hannah? It was.
Yeah. If you just did an AI research, AI plagiarism app, research those two, that'd be very interesting. But before we continue, can I just bring up Emmanuel Jesu Champion, who's coming on the show on Wednesday night, LA time, 5:30, Australia time, Thursday, 12:30. He's raised an interesting comment that a lot of Adventist apologists raise, and I'd love your thoughts on this. Truth is owned by God. Jesus is the truth. To take truth from one and present it as from God is consistent with who the source of all truth is, the way, the truth, and the life. Can't plagiarize what Jesus unctioned and inspired unless, of course, I'll just read the rest offline here. You are borrowing from Jesus himself, and in this case, he does not mind. He is the owner.
Well,
that's a common kind of apologist statement.
Well, here's what Veltman admitted freely and openly is that Ellen White minimized that and denied doing that many times. Here's a quote from a letter that she wrote. Let's see here.
Can you hear the thunder coming through here? There's a massive.
That what that is?
Massive thunderstorm.
I thought maybe I was brushing my mic or something.
No, it's a massive thunderstorm going overhead.
For instance, one of the things that Ronald Numbers mentions in his book, he points out some things that Ellen White clearly borrowed from others. And what she wrote was, that which I have written in regard to health was not taken from books or papers. As I related to others, the things which I have been shown, the question was asked, have you seen the paper, the laws of life of the Water Cure Journal? I told them no. I had not seen either of the papers. Said they, what you have seen agrees very much with much of their teachings. She said, I talked freely with Dr. Lay and many others upon the things which have been shown me in reference to health. I have never seen a paper treating upon health. In the paragraph prior to that, Veltman points out that Ellen White had taken she had written in I think one of her books. She said, on one visit to the home of Brother Kellogg, she had borrowed a book to select a piece for the Reformer, magazine I think the church put out. But anyway, and she also said things like, I see that you regard my work and my mission as on a level with your own work. When I stand before the people, I do not stand in my own spirit. My words are not mine, but his who sent me and has given me a message to bear. If you consider the words a rebuke, take them, for the Lord meant them to you as such. So this was when she had written a rebuke to someone, and they felt that it might be some of her ideas. She also said things along the lines that, let me give you an example. One time about 10 years, I think, after I graduated from my academy, we went back for one of their alumni weekends, and some others from my class were part, and myself, there were 4 of us, I think, were part of a kind of a general Sabbath school lesson where we had a discussion up front, and somebody quoted something from Ellen White, and I said, well, maybe Ellen White wasn't right on everything she said. Well, that got a reaction. Someone stood up in the audience, one of the faculty members who I knew, he had been a faculty member when I was there, and he quoted this one quote from her where she said she doesn't write a single, well, I'm trying to find it here and I'm upset with myself, but everything she writes comes from God, is what she was saying. And she doesn't write her own opinion. She writes what she's told by God. And yes, she says it may be only a letter, but they were the gems meant for you from God. And remember, folks, when in her earlier writings and in many of her visions, and later on she kind of cut them out because in her later books, because they were going to be used in books for the general public. She used to say, I saw, then I was carried down to, or I was shown. And Veltman says she meant that whatever followed originated through a special prophetic experience. And in one of her books published in 1864, which was Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, she said, the great facts of faith connected with the history of men of old have been opened to me in vision. So I think this idea that all truth is God's truth, while if one believes in God, and probably most of the people watching here does, that's first of all, I don't think that's an excuse for copying other people's work and not giving them credit. And secondly, just admit it. If that's what you're doing, just admit it, saying, yes, I copied these things from other people's books because they were God's truth, and I thought they were expressed very, very well by this other person.
Exactly.
But she doesn't say that.
And how easy would that be to say? Because it's like she could recount what she saw in the vision as she saw it, recount it that way, and then say, now I'm going to put it in a format. I've read these other books, and here are their names of the authors, and they put it into words that I can't articulate, and people would be fine with that, you know. And if God is giving her these messages, if she is the messenger of God with him whispering in her ear and giving her these visions, God is an ethical God, and God would have foreseen these issues that have become a great thorn in the side of Adventism. He would have foreseen this and thought, now let me help that not to happen, and I'll tell Ellen to make sure she's very open about sources.
And here I found some of the quotes she gave. Here's a response, or a letter to Dr. Paulson, St. Helena, California, June 14 of 1906, and it's in Selected Messages, page 24 to 37. It says, God was speaking through clay. You might say that this communication was only a letter. Yes, it was a letter, but prompted by the Spirit of God to bring before your mind things that had been shown me. In these letters which I write, in the testimonies I bear, I am presenting to you that which the Lord has presented to me. I do not write one article in the paper expressing merely my own ideas. They are what God has opened before me in vision, the precious rays of light shining from the throne. And here's another letter from 1882. She says, you have thereby insulted the Spirit of God, because somebody said, I'm not so sure you're right on this. You have thereby insulted the Spirit of God. You know how the Lord has manifested himself through the spirit of prophecy. Past, present, and future have passed before me. If you seek to turn aside the counsel of God to suit yourselves, if you lessen the confidence of God's people in the testimonies he has sent them, you are rebelling against God as certainly as were Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. God was speaking through clay. You might say that this communication was only a letter. Sounds like she's copying herself. Yes, it was a letter, but prompted by the Spirit of God. In the letters which I write, in the testimonies I bear, I am presenting to you that which the Lord has presented to me. I do not write one article in the paper, etc. And yet she goes on, and if you read Walter Ray's books and say, are these just the things that were open to her in vision? It's pretty clear that she was copying wholesale from other people. Now, something that Veltman did not do, and that is he did not go through and compare other Adventist books or articles. And there I saw one website which showed almost word for word copying from John Andrews, books of John Andrews that Ellen White did. Now, they might not have cared, if they had known, and they may very well have known. But the church has never admitted to this kind of thing. And the white estate resists to some degree even today, though they've gotten much more open, but they still minimize it. So, but back to Veltman. So anyway, they did this. Well, before they turned it over to Veltman, they had, I believe, John McAdams do a study of the first half of the Desire of Ages and compare it to Hannah, and they had Walter Speck do the second half, and Speck thought it was pretty minimal, not much to see here. But if I recall, it was McAdams said it was 3 point something percent of the first half was borrowed from Hannah, and Hannah wasn't the only one that she was borrowing from. Veltman's study had a large number of books that they compared it against, and also there's something intriguing that they didn't really compare. They found indications that she had also borrowed from a novel, a novel that had been written by one clergyman, and that was, no one pretended that it was real, but she copied from him. So maybe this guy was inspired in his novel, but we were told when I was in academy that novels were something we should not read.
Exactly. Maybe that's why she didn't want us to find out. Kevin Morgan has said not McAdams. Is that?
It wasn't. Okay, no. I thought it was. Maybe it wasn't Don McAdams. I'll see if I can find it. Well, Kevin Morgan is pretty knowledgeable, and I've watched him, and I can see that he has a lot of knowledge about this kind of thing. But I thought it was. But
I'll just who. Yeah, he might. Kevin, if you could just explain what you meant by not McAdams there, and the Emmanuel Gesture Champion has written, there is eyewitness testimony of her in vision. How do you guys account for this? Well, it's easy. There's eyewitness testimony of Joseph Smith as well. People get carried away with events and with people with charisma. People get carried away with it and believe things are happening that aren't happening.
The story about Ellen White holding up the book, the heavy Bible, and up above her head and pointing at and getting it right, that there is no eyewitness account of that. There's two interesting accounts of that. There's, I think, 4, but there's 2 in particular. And in my interview with Kevin the other day, we were chatting about this, and someone just said she has no charisma. Wow. She had charisma, all right. But speaker. With this parlor trick of her holding up the Bible, the account. So I was reading the accounts to Kevin, and one of the accounts is Loughborough, who's very, he's got skin in the game, but he wasn't there. He was recounting, I think his sister was there, or a sister's friend was there, and they'd said to her she was holding up this 16-pound Bible. But there were a couple of eyewitnesses, and they said she held it up at a 45-degree angle for only a couple of minutes. Yeah. So I'd probably believe those testimonies over those who get carried away with this charismatic kind of story and drama. And I've seen it in real time, in real life. I've been at events where people later recount these wondrous things that happened that just did not happen. People just get caught up in it, and they love the drama. We're wired to love drama. Veltman did say forthrightly, I thought, he said, before attempting to answer these questions, let me turn to another distinctive characteristic of these writings. Ellen White did not typically admit to the use of sources. Her unique prophetic experience received the emphasis. Until recently, the typical Adventist reader of her writings would have resonated with the words of James White, which he quoted, which I read to you earlier. So, that I'm trying to find this who wrote this, because
I think Kevin's just written. Is it Specht and Cottrell?
Oh, he's right.
Yeah.
Cottrell did the first half, Speck the second half.
Yeah.
And it was Cottrell who, you were right, Kevin. It was Cottrell who did the first half and said it was 3-point-something%. Yep, he's
That's
right.
right. Thank you. And also, Emmanuel has written, she is a feeble little lady. She was actually 18 at that point when she was holding the Bible up, around 18. And 18-year-olds, I'm sure, can hold up a heavy book for a couple of minutes. But my point isn't the holding up of the book or not. It's how people recount back things that they claim have happened. Joseph Smith, would you therefore say, Emmanuel, people that recounted amazing stories that he allegedly took, carried out, do you believe them? I doubt it.
Yeah. One of the things that that Veltman points out, he talks a little bit about the Fanny Bolton situation. He doesn't go into great detail about it, but he points out some of the issues there. And he said, Ellen White said she had to have someone else prepare her writings than Fanny Bolton because Fanny Bolton was pointing out that it was largely her own work. And it says, Veltman says, it is basically the same burden of Ellen White's over the reception of her writings as messages from the Lord that led her to conceal her dependence on literary sources. So, I mean, Veltman clearly points out, and I don't think anybody could fairly say that she was open about it. She wasn't open about it. And what was also interesting, something else that Veltman, I don't want to jump to the conclusion too fast here, but something else that Veltman points out is that when, as they did their analysis, it was very difficult to do it because the sentences would change a little, and what may have started out as verbatim is no longer verbatim. But much of it, as I said before, came out of these writing books or scrapbooks of Ellen White. And they would be selected, compiled by Marian Davis, and she might clean it up, fix it up, and then for an article in the review, and then later it gets picked up and changed a little bit more for the Desire of Ages. So these things may have gone through, and almost always did go through 3, 2, 3, 4, 5 rewrites, and of course they're going to change, and they're going to be less obvious in their parallels. One of the things Veltman said that they found is that the earlier the source, for instance, if it's in Ellen White's hand or if it's in Ellen White's little scrapbooks, and that may not be the right term, but in the little books that she would write in, that the more likely the source it was more close to the source and more strictly verbatim than it was by the time it got into the Desire of Ages. And he also said that it was their finding that this copying wasn't being done primarily by Marian Davis or any of her other workers. It was Ellen White who was doing it.
Yeah, that's right. He confirms that. And also with where people say the verbatim part, word for word, that is the 2 to 3% that you were referring to before, or Cottrell said 3.5%. I'm pretty sure from my reading, Fred Veltman had a rating for verbatim copying, but if one word had been changed in a sentence, he did it in the units of sentences, he classed that as a lesser word-for-word copying. So I'd be interested to know how many of those verbatim minus one word, because that would elevate and lift the 2 to 3%, I'm sure.
Yes.
Emmanuel has said, well, then you test what is said. Exactly. That's what we're doing. And we're testing it. And if you look at a claim like holding up the Bible, Loughborough wasn't there. His sister or her sister's friend tells him about it. There is a lady who is there, and she says, yeah, she held up 45 degrees, not 90, and held it for a couple of minutes. So that's testing. And I'm inclined to agree with that more realistic view than the parlor trick view that Loughborough is trying to promote and create the woo-woo.
Yeah. There's he says, Veltman says that Marian Davis felt free to expand or abridge the text according to her best judgment. I mean, and there was a reason that Ellen White called Marian Davis her bookmaker. She wasn't gambling. She wasn't going out and gambling. That's another kind of bookmaker. Yeah. She was Marian Davis was very skilled, which is not to criticize anybody. She was very skilled, and Ellen White counted on that skill. There is one point in the book here where they quote her complaining about some of her, she called them copyists, who she gave some of her work to clean up and to get back to her, and complaining because the person wasn't making enough changes, that he was just copying. He had been a school teacher and he was just copying what she wrote word for word. She was unhappy about that. He even wrote down the mistakes in spelling. She was very unhappy. Yeah. She wanted him to improve it, to fix it up, not to give it back to her just exactly as she wrote it.
Yeah.
At the end of each of the chapters here, about the various chapters that were done, Veltman gives his analysis of what percentage or what kind of copying was being done. So here's one: the fullness of time, from the Desire of Ages, chapter 3. He says, when evaluated, said, we rated 67 of the 130 sentences of this chapter as independent. So 67 that originated with the Desire of Ages text. We found 4 independent biblical quotations. The remaining 59 sentences exhibited literary dependence in 5 categories. 1 was verbatim, 9 simple paraphrase, 20 loose paraphrase, 5 source Bible, and 24 partial independence. So basically, as I read his materials, he was saying, she was borrowing heavily, 35 to 40%. He says here he's talking about 59 sentences which involved some degree of dependence. There were 44 parallels from Harris, 6 from Thayer, 5 from Kennedy, and 4 from combinations of Thayer, Kennedy, and the Bible. In some of the material, she seems to be paralleling Harris, but in her own literary style and theme development. One thing that Veltman points out, he said, when we gathered all these biographies of Jesus from that time period, the ones that she had in her library, he said it was kind of an eerie thing to read these and look at all these, because it became clear that Desire of Ages was part of a genre of work. Adventists tend to, and I certainly did when I was an Adventist and when I was growing up, see the Desire of Ages as being this unusual piece of work that is unique. And what is clear is it is not unique. There are massive numbers of biographies of Jesus from that time. And Veltman said, as you page through them, often they'll have the same pictures, that they're laid out similarly. He said, and that's why he said it's almost eerie to see that. And
I think she did copy pictures herself, not just other. Yeah.
Yes, she did. There were some.
Can I just interrupt for a second and quickly bring up,
Sure.
This is Sherry Winkler has just said, I think it's poignant that we talk about this for a moment. So do you two men reject the gifts for today, such as prophecy? We're not talking about the gifts of prophecy. We're suggesting, well, we're not even really suggesting that, but our focus is on, did Ellen White have the gift of prophecy? Can someone who claimed to get words from God, who's borrowed so much, can she really claim to be a messenger of God? But I'm sure that, the gifts pertain to the Christian flow as usual. We're focusing on Ellen White. But thanks for that, Sherry. Appreciate it.
One of the things Veltman says in that one chapter, this chapter 3, he says, before concluding the summary, he says, we must note that 2 documents we examined in connection with this chapter show that Ellen White personally borrowed from her literary sources. There's a manuscript 24 available in hand script, and a letter to John Harvey Kellogg written in typescript show literary dependence at an early pre-publication stage and in a personal form. We thereby conclude that this paraphrasing from the source was the work of Ellen White and not one of her literary assistants.
Can you just read that again?
Yeah, sure. It says, before concluding this summary of chapter 3, we must note that 2 documents we examined in connection with this chapter show that Ellen White personally borrowed from her literary sources. Manuscript 24 from 1891, available in hand script, and a letter to John Harvey Kellogg written in 1895 and available in typescript demonstrate literary dependence at an early pre-publication stage and in a personal form. We thereby conclude that this paraphrasing from a source was the work of Ellen White and not one of her literary assistants. I found something earlier today, or actually this weekend when I was reviewing some of this material, and it wasn't from Desire of Ages, but found citations where Ellen White had written a testimony to someone. And that was, if you go back through, if you want to get depressed, go back through and read the testimonies to the church. Some of the letters are pretty personal and pretty pointed. And some people say, hey, oh, they needed it. Well, I'm not so sure, but that's fine. But there are some instances where she gave reproofs to people and told them what she saw in vision, and where she quoted, she was borrowing what she found and what she wrote to them from a literary source.
Yeah. Wow.
You kind of wonder.
And I think when I interviewed John Hackwell, he said that he went into one of the vaults somewhere, and one of the first things he saw was a letter to Willie White, and the whole letter was copied verbatim, word for word, from some other letter she had. She just copied the exact same letter, but changed Dear Willie instead of who the other letter was. He was shocked that it was just word for word she's sending off to her son. Hey, Sherry Whitaker has just written here, and I just want to quickly address this one. Thanks again, Sherry, for your comment. Appreciate you getting involved here. I know for sure she used the format of the other guy's book, but in my opinion, her book, Desire of Ages, was much more seductive to the Lord in a good way. Not saying it's perfect, but this is true. I'd suggest that if you're using the word seductive as being some kind of sublime, beautiful wording and writing, that's Marian Davis's doing. Often you read Ellen White's raw material from the journals, and it's quite roughly written, quite energetic and full of life. And I'm not criticizing it, but this kind of seduction they're talking about is Marian Davis, I believe. She's the one that really, added to that. Emmanuel says, a lot of speculation without evidence, folks. I highly recommend, Emmanuel, that before our interview, go and read, what's the book again that I brought up on the screen earlier?
This book, Veltman's book?
Yes, the summary.
Book?
Yeah, go and read that. It's not a long read, and our interview's on Wednesday night, 5:30 your time. 8:30 your time, Emmanuel, but LA time. Go and read that, because it's hardly speculation without evidence. That there's an 8-year study packed with evidence. I think what we're talking about is how the church is trying to minimize the evidence that is obviously clearly found in that book.
Here from Trenchard's conclusion, as afterwards, so to speak, he says that Veltman significantly expanded the range and variety of material within the constellation of Ellen White's textual tradition on the life of Christ, and consistently found evidence of literary dependence in the early stages of this tradition, especially her handwritten materials. In many cases, these earlier related materials have a higher degree of dependence than the Desire of Ages, than the published material.
Wow.
So what becomes obvious is she's sitting there. I mean, I don't know how else it could be when you have verbatim material in her scrapbooks. She's sitting there with the book open in front of her,
copying
and copying from it.
Yeah. And then Marian, who's collating all of this, as we said earlier, Ellen White didn't write Desire of Ages as a book beginning to end.
No.
She had all these journals, and she said, here you go, Marian, please put this into a great book. And Marian did the job, and she's the one that collated it into a sequence. Unknowingly, I'm pretty sure that Ellen had been borrowing, but the phrasing that she took, because she did paraphrase it so much from Ellen's original work, the verbatim copying is minimized because of that. Emmanuel writes, and I'm interested in your answer to this. What is wrong in borrowing from other literature? Is this a sin? Is it wrong? Is it what she borrowed true or not? Well, actually, a lot of it's not true. Like some of the things she said about Jesus, there's one point where Jesus healed someone in the Desire of Ages as a total gift. There was no requirement for this person to do anything, and he was healed. But in Ellen White's Desire of Ages recount of that story, the man had to demonstrate his faith before he was healed. So there's some pretty serious changes.
Well, and is it a sin to borrow from other people? I would say no. But where the sin comes in, and I don't like that word sin. I don't use it personally. And but let me just say the wrongdoing is when you say you didn't do it, when you say that it's your own work, when you say it's because it's what God told you to say, and when you say I don't write one word that is somebody else's. At least when she was talking about her testimonies, and her testimonies had borrowed material. And when she writes, there was not one heretical line in all of her work. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is overstatement. It's just kind of like, what did Richard Nixon do that was so terrible that forced him to resign as president of the United States? Was it the actual crime itself? No, it was the cover up.
Yeah.
That's where you get into trouble. It's not the act itself. It's the lying about it and covering it up. And that's what I'm convinced that's what she was doing. Now, Kevin said there was a small amount that was borrowed.
He's downplayed it to 1%.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And in Trenchard's summary, he says that Veltman finds that on average, about 31% of the Desire of Ages material he examined showed some degree of literary dependence. He seems especially troubled by Ellen White's denials of literary borrowing. So that, if you don't tell me on one hand that it's not a sin to borrow and it's okay for her to do it, it's all God's truth. But then tell me, but it was just this tiny amount when we know it wasn't, when we know it was more. If that's the answer, just say, yeah, she borrowed a whole lot. And boy, wasn't she good at it.
Yeah.
It wasn't, exactly. And wasn't Marian good at it.
Yeah.
But exactly. As Trenchard says, he says, of course, any amount of verifiable literary borrowing acknowledged by Ellen White or not poses a problem. It is not the amount of source dependence, but the fact of it that is the issue.
Exactly. And isn't it interesting that people like Dr. Warren Trenchard and Fred Veltman, who I think was PhD as well,
yes.
Isn't it interesting that the indoctrination runs so deep that even though they expose this material, reveal this material, deep down, they still defend Ellen White.
Yeah.
It's incredible. That blows my mind.
Still say nonsense like Ronald Numbers viciously attacked Ellen White.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Just don't lie to me. Just tell it to me straight and say, he pointed out some things that we didn't realize. And boy, aren't we glad we did? And now we have a better understanding of inspiration and how it works. But that some will say that, but they still you back them in the corner and they'll say, but it was just tiny.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, and I don't mean to be critical of any individual. And Kevin, you say she doesn't say I was shown in Desire of Ages. What they point out is that when they were taking these materials that she had written before, they stripped out the I was showns because it was going to be read by a general audience and it wouldn't mean anything to the general audience. And that's the same type of material that was in the earlier books. It just they took it out. And
in her original journals, it's peppered with I was shown.
Yes.
Jerry Connell, I think, has written, Dr. Warren Trenchard was my Greek professor at Canadian Union College. Jerry, if you have any contact with Warren, can you ask him to come on the show and message me privately and I'll give you my details.
I would love to hear Warren Trenchard give his take on this because I was so impressed at how he at the fairness, what I thought was the fairness and that he explored this work. And one of the things he said is his goal in doing this says this report needs not only to be preserved, but also to be made more widely and easily available. It is my hope that this condensed version will help make it so.
Yes.
Good for him.
Yeah, and good for him.
And he says there's so much left to do to study her work. And frankly, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but he says, here are some examples. We need to thoroughly investigate how she produced her writings and examine her earlier texts as whether or not they're complete literary documents. Thoroughly study her handwritten documents, because this is where she would have been copying out of in her scrapbooks. Compare the fictional writings of this guy named Ingram and Ellen White's writings, because they noted some parallels, and submit her writings to tradition criticism, and conduct a comprehensive content analysis of her writings and potential sources, and investigate the possibilities of other types of literature as sources for her writings. One of the things that's pointed out in here from one of Ellen White's, something she wrote, was about she heard some talks and sermons of W.W. Prescott at a camp meeting, and she wrote about it and just was so impressed and said she thought he was inspired, that God the Holy Spirit had touched his lips or something like that. It was some term like that, and said that he was inspired in what he'd said. It was so wonderful. Something else that I wanted to say, and that is something else that struck me as I was sitting here as we were getting ready to go on, and I think you had to step away for a little bit, and it hit me. We have a very different view today of what it is to take someone's work and pass it out as your own. Anybody remember George Harrison's "My Sweet Lord"?
Yes.
He got sued for that.
Yeah.
And what was it? This is the
Shirelles.
And it was he's my. What is it? I have it up here. If I can just pull it up.
And he had listened to that song. He loved the song, and I think he realized later that he had kind of subconsciously.
I'm clearly not inspired. It was the Chiffons' 1963 hit single. Yeah. He's So Fine. And I listened to both of them tonight before we went on.
Yeah.
And something, they were a lot more different than a lot of the stuff Ellen White wrote that she got from somebody else. Let's put it that way. Way more different.
Yeah.
It was not even close. Very, very dissimilar. But the fact is, it was considered to be copyright infringement, and he paid what in today's dollars is just under 1.9 million American dollars to settle that lawsuit.
Yeah. Did you know he eventually went on to buy the record label and the rights to that song?
He didn't. He could have used that 1.9 million.
Yeah. He might have made it back. Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of apologists say, well, Ellen was, might have done that by mistake and heard that in the ether, and therefore there's some similarities. But this very involved Fred Veltman study, 8 years long, funded by the church, definitely produces evidence that even Fred Veltman, I think, and perhaps this is his speculation, but I think there's things that he has said that demonstrate he was shaken by this.
Yes, I think that's right. And the fact that and I realize it's kind of a double hearsay thing, but that Nancy LaCourt told Veltman that Fred Hoyt had said, that Veltman told Fred Hoyt, her uncle, don't let them hide it away. Yeah. Don't let them hide it away. Why would he think they would hide it away?
Yeah, exactly. Deanna has written, It's the Deception. And thanks for sharing that, Deanna, because my generation, and Emmanuel, who's being an apologist for Ellen White here, is too young to remember what my generation, your generation, we were raised to, I remember pastors on the stage, the podium or whatever, the rostrum, saying, this lady who had a third grade education was able to produce direct from God the desire of ages, steps to Christ, and they wouldn't even deny Marian Davis involvement. So the deception was perpetuated, and the 1919 conference, those who are questioning that we shouldn't question. Or stating we shouldn't question. Go and listen to that. Go and read that, I should say. That shows you that there was a lot of concern floating around that was never addressed, and so from that moment on, Ellen White on the pedestal.
Yes. One of the things, I just kind of opened one page here, and they, in chapter 14 of the Desire of Ages, Veltman said sentences 112 and 113 seem to depend partially on Ingram's fictionalized account of the life of Christ. But Ellen White may be drawing from her Spirit of Prophecy text and not consciously using Ingram. If this were the only reference that resembled Ingram, we might be less confident in our claim for some dependence on Ingram, but his influence appears in chapters 75 and 76, as well as in chapter 77.
And this is Fred Veltman saying this?
Yes, this is Veltman saying, well, this is Veltman. Yeah. This is the condensed Veltman, but
yes,
this is Veltman's work. So he says, our analysis suggests the need for further study of her use of the fictionalized writings of Ingram. You know, what I think ought to be stressed more than anything else is the limitations of this study.
Yes.
Again, there was a finite number of books that they compared it to. They didn't compare to any Adventist writers, which we know she heavily borrowed from. It was very limited, and it was valuable in itself, but it's very limited.
Yeah, very true.
And I see comments about steps to Christ. And if there was a way to prove it, and I don't think I ever could, or anybody probably ever could, the influence of Marian Davis is probably overwhelming. I mean, that would be my
100%. Thought. Yeah.
Something else that struck me, and now I'm just kind of riffing here. I heard a presentation of Adventist Today Sabbath seminar a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking. Fanny Bolton came up.
Yeah.
And Fanny Bolton got really roasted by Ellen White. She tore her apart. And I'd like you to ponder this. Ellen White had this pipeline to God, was always receiving messages from God. Fanny Bolton was fired by Ellen White how many times? Does anybody know?
A lot.
Four times, which means she was hired 3 times by her.
Yeah.
That doesn't need expounding upon.
But she was so troubled by all of that I think she spent her final years, and died pretty young, but spent her final years in a mental institution.
That would be hard. You get attacked by God himself through Ellen White.
Yeah.
And torn apart and humiliated in public. And that would be difficult.
There's a quote I'm just trying to get Jennifer Lynn quick to send me in Messenger so I can open it up and show about another person that she lambasted. And we were talking about before, was she self-deceived? Did she really believe she was having these visions? And therefore we can exonerate her a little bit because of her belief that they were true, and that what she was doing was honorable and not wrong. And we kind of were saying that maybe that's true. But then why was she so vicious with these? She's the one that was vicious. Who did you say? Nichols before was saying that Ron Numbers was vicious towards her.
That was Roger W. Kuhn. Said
right.
He viciously attacked the prophet.
And yet, the Ron Numbers book is not vicious at all. And yet there are many counts of Ellen White viciously undermining people's character.
There was a question here about Fanny Bolton and how she was attacked. The White Estate actually has on their website a small book about Ellen White, Fanny Bolton, and the Fanny Bolton story. I didn't read it, but I've read materials about her before, and that's what they usually focus on, is that she had mental health problems, which doesn't say anything about the merit of what she had to say. Just that she had mental health problems.
Right. Yeah. Which is kind of helps to diminish what she had to say. Emmanuel has written, show us these vicious statements from Ellen White.
Well,
Have we got some?
Before tomorrow, here, I'll give you an example. This isn't about Fanny Bolton, but if you read the article in Spectrum about on October 22, the weekend of October 22 of this year, there was a meeting. There was a meeting at PUC of scholars about Ellen White and the issues. And one of the things that the article said, and it really ticked me off, one of the things the article said was that Gil Valentine, in a presentation, said something that shocked the assembled there, and these were Ellen White scholars in large part, and they didn't say what it was. And I was kind of, what kind of journalism is that? He said something that shocked all these people, but maybe it'll be in his new book. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, I happened to make some comments complaining about that in the chat on the Adventist Today Sabbath seminar, and someone who I think either had a pipeline to or was there, I'm not sure, said, you told me that you said that you read the book J.N. Andrews by Gil Valentine. You know what it was. And I knew then that I did know what it was. When when J.N. Andrews was dying in I think it was Switzerland. No, or France. He was dying anyway. He had tuberculosis, and he was not long for the world, and everybody knew he was dying. They sent a missionary whose name escapes me to replace him. And Ellen White wrote a letter. And she wrote a letter that it wasn't enough to just say, please give this to him. And she insisted that this replacement missionary read it to him. And I read the letter myself. It's on the White Estate website. And Ellen White knew he was dying, and she basically told him about all of his faults. Is that what you do when someone is dying, someone who you loved as a friend, as a brother in Christ, who's dying after a long life of service, and you start reciting all of his faults? There were at least 3 times, and it might have been more, where she says, I told you before you went to Europe that you should remarry. And you didn't follow my advice. You would have been so much better off. Now, that seems kind of minor, but she tells him that at least 3 times. But she goes on and just repeats to him about how oversensitive he was, and how he just over and over and over again telling him about his faults. Is that what you would do at someone's funeral?
Yeah.
It's even worse when you do it to their face while they're dying. Or do it in writing to keep it for all eternity. This recitation of all of his faults. Gil Valentine in the book is dismayed, to say at least, and he said it was. He said some things about it that were very well. He said it was. He said all but said it was indefensible. And just if I knew you had done something like that, what do you think it would do to my opinion of you?
Yeah.
And should it do that to my opinion of you? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
And maybe
no. Somebody said you are a lawyer. This is hearsay. I've read the letter. I read the letter. It's on the White Estate website. That's not hearsay.
And I think too, I think Emmanuel's focusing on this word vicious. Just to give you a bit of background there, Emmanuel, we were saying that guy that you mentioned earlier had said Ron Numbers was vicious. And we were saying, by comparison, if you want to say that he was vicious, Ellen White was vicious also. And maybe so I'm saying the word vicious is incorrect in the statement about Ron Numbers. Now, Kevin says that Ron Grable helped Ron Numbers soften his statements. Yes, certainly. But I don't think even the original was vicious. So if you want to say, if you're on the side of Adventist apologists who say Ron Numbers is vicious, then you also need to look at some of the things Ellen White said. And if you're going to use that word vicious for Ron, they can equally apply for Ellen. But either way you look at it, whether it's vicious or not, that's pretty insensitive to be doing that. And I'm trying to find this quote that that was just here a minute ago, but I accidentally deleted it. Anyway, it's about this guy who was a treasurer there in one of the publishing houses at Battle Creek just before Ellen White came to Australia, and he sued Ellen White because he was responsible for lowering her royalties. And when he lowered the royalties, Ellen White, of course, wasn't happy about that, and she defamed him to the point where he took legal action, a $50,000 lawsuit. We don't know if he won. We don't know what happened, but the link was here somewhere. So we'll try and find that a bit later and read out as well. And yeah. And Emmanuel has just said Ellen White told the brother he should have gotten married to help in ministry and with his character. Yeah, but he's
and you tell that on his deathbed at least three times, really?
Yeah. And
Is
we
that
might, be
what
able to
you
try and, we might be able to try and find that exact statement if we can.
I
before
can,
tomorrow.
yes, I can pull that up. I'll send it to you. I read it within the last 4 days, and it was not very pleasant. It is not what a true friend would write to another on their deathbed.
And yeah.
I mean, we all know that it is the crudest thing you can think of to say bad things about somebody at their funeral.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it worse to say it to them when they are dying?
Exactly. Here's that article I was just talking about, and thank you, Jennifer Lynn Quick, who's just sent that to me. Archibald R. Henry of Battle Creek, and this is in a newspaper. This is not in an Adventist record of it. This is what the local community are observing and reporting on. And to me, this demonstrates that somebody obviously felt the brunt of Ellen White not being happy with them. Archibald R. Henry of Battle Creek is suing to recover from the General Conference Association of the Seventh-day Adventists damages of $50,000 for disseminating articles detrimental to his character and lowering him in the estimation of the people of that denomination. Mr. Henry has been prominent in almost every board of the many institutions of the Adventist denomination, treasurer of the college and treasurer of the publishing company. He was relieved from the latter position about 4 months ago, and he attributes his loss of prestige in the denomination to the dissemination of several articles, visions, or so-called inspired writings by Mrs. Ellen G. White, charging him with worldliness and with being possessed by satanic impulses and influences. Mr. Henry attributes, in part, Mrs. White's attacks on him to his being instrumental in having the amount of royalties on her publications cut down. Mrs. White is now in Australia, where she has been for several years, and despite her advanced years, is one of the most active and influential members of the denomination.
Yeah.
Thanks for sending that through, Jennifer.
I would commend to each of you, and I have more to read, but reading the biography of J. Ann Andrews was very illuminating. In some ways, it is almost a biography of James White and Ellen White. And one of the things that becomes through very, very clearly, and that is that in the early Adventist church, in the church of the late 19th century, and moving a bit into the 20th, is that if you were going to survive in the church, you had to submit to the corrections from Ellen White and the directions of James White. That was necessary. And if you did not, then you were rejecting God, and you were done for. You were not part of that group anymore. It's that clear. And
there are many examples of that happening.
There are.
And let's not get hooked up on if we term that as vicious or not. That's not even the point. The point is that happened so often. You go against, particularly when James and Ellen were a team before he died. Yeah.
I see Kevin says the last letter from Ellen White to J. Ann Andrews was in March. He died in October. Well, took a little while back in those days for letters to get from America to Europe. And what's more important than that, it was the last letter, and she knew he was dying, and he knew he was dying. And it doesn't say anything about how critical the letter was of him. And somebody else has said Kellogg and Canwright got smashed by Ellen. They did. In fact, I just read today where Kellogg even said, well, he had used Ellen himself to get at his critics earlier on, and said, well, it may be a sort of justice that it's being done to me.
Right. Just a quick plug for Gil's book that you just mentioned is a good read. Jane Andrews, Mission Pioneer, Evangelist, and Thought Leader. It's a great book, that one. And his other book, Ostriches and Canaries. I think it's fabulous read. I'm on my second time through that one. And okay, back to Fred Veltman. What else are we going to chat about him today? This is a two-part interview, by the way. I'm chatting with Arthur Klym today. Great to have him here for part one of this Fred Veltman research study, the 8-year study. Excuse me. And we're having part two tomorrow, which is LA time 5:30 or Tuesday, will it be?
Yes.
Yeah. And Australia, Wednesday, 12:30.
Here's just an interesting quote in the book about Marian Davis, from Marian Davis. In the first place, she said, I've worked for a better opening to the chapters. The chapters of the old manuscript began too often with some notice of Jesus going here or there, until the book seemed almost like a diary. That has been corrected. Then I have tried to begin both chapters and paragraphs with short sentences, and indeed to simplify wherever possible, to drop out every needless word and to make the work, as I have said, more contact and vigorous. On some chapters, I had fresh live matter that will add greatly to the interest of the book. To the extent that it's well done, I think Marian Davis hasn't gotten enough credit.
100%.
So, I mean, just kind of, they say that Veltman said that one of the weaknesses here is that source parallels in sermons remains a challenge because they really didn't have that. And Ellen White heard hundreds of sermons throughout her life, gave hundreds herself. And there's a thought that a lot of these materials came from sermons, hers and others. And of course, hers, there wouldn't be a problem with that. But others, one wonders about whether or not they had the same kind of inspiration that Ellen claimed. If they were shown some of the same things, nobody else claimed it. I mean, one of the things Veltman says is, well, sometimes she departed from Hannah's comments. Well, yeah, I'm sure she did. Something that is a bit off from Veltman, though Veltman mentions it, and that is that J.N. Andrews, shortly after Ellen White had her vision that led to the Great Controversy, the first works about the Great Controversy, is J.N. Andrews came to her and gave her Paradise Lost and said, a lot of your ideas really seem to parallel this. That's not a quote, but he said, have you read this? And she said, oh no, she hadn't read it. And she put it high up on a shelf, she said, so that until she had it all written out, her vision all written out, she wouldn't be influenced by it. She said that about a lot of different things. That also was the source, and I used to have a copy of it, and I seem to be good at saying I used to have this, but I had gotten my hands on it. There was a woman, I saw Darwin Tompkins here earlier. There was a woman at Walla Walla College who had been was a English professor there for many, many years. She was nearing the end of her career when we were there, Darwin. Whose name was Ruth Bergeson, and she got her master's degree in 1957 from Pacific Union College, and she wrote her thesis about the parallels between Paradise Lost and Ellen White's stories.
Oh, really?
And I had it. Where it is, I don't know. I've been trying to find it online and haven't been able to find it. But one of the things Ruth Bergeson did was she listed out just a huge number of places where Ellen White and John Milton agreed on things that aren't in the Bible, like what Eve was thinking, things like that, which is quite remarkable. And she ended her paper, as I recall, with the thought that perhaps God had also inspired John Milton. So that was interesting.
Verbatim.
Yeah, well, and not all of it was verbatim, because John Milton wrote in poetry, but the idea is this whole great controversy thing. That's the one thing that, other than the investigative judgment and sometimes the Sabbath, it's the one thing that is used to say, look, Ellen White had to have heard this from God, because it's unique. It's unique to her.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons, I think, who said it just quickly earlier, Kevin mentioned that, he's an editor and he doesn't expect to get credit. Editors don't get credit. And that's very true. Yeah, my sister-in-law is an author, and she has an editor, and the editor doesn't appear on but the works are enhanced in a nice way because of the editor's work. But this is different in my view, because we were sold that Ellen White was given these messages from God to us by the church and by her. And therefore, as we dig into, well, if there are other sources, what's the mechanism? So therefore, we do have to look at who the editors were. We do have to look at who the sources were. And as we both agree, Marian Davis was, as we observed this kind of process, we also acknowledge that she was incredible, very, very gifted.
Oh, she was.
Yeah, beyond the average editor, and she went beyond the average editor's role as well.
Yeah, there's been a quote here of this. Here is the so-called vicious statement, and has a portion of the letter that Ellen White wrote to J.N. Andrews, where she's saying, remember, I told you, I wrote you from Texas to obtain a wife before you return to Europe. Do you suppose I would have given you such advice if I've had no light upon the matter? And be assured, no such counsel would have been given you without good reason. I was shown that you follow your own judgment and your own ideas too tenaciously. He's dying.
Yeah.
He's dying. And she doesn't say it just once. She says it more times than that, and kind of rips him for having too high a view of his own scholarship, as I recall. It just,
deeply inappropriate.
Yes, deeply inappropriate. It is. Yeah. Someone says, read it in a nice voice, brother. I'm getting too fired up, and I need to be more measured in what I say, I think. And I apologize for that.
Hey, I do that all the time. I love affecting my voice on it.
I feel passion. I feel some passion about this, because
that's all right.
And here's why. And I suspect it's the same way with you, Peter. I read the materials about Ellen White. One of my favorite books was Early Writings. It was thrilling to me. And I believed it. Yeah. I believed this stuff, that she was getting these visions. I didn't know she was copying Foy's vision.
Yeah.
I didn't know that she was. I believed it when they said she never believed in the shut door, and that she never interpreted her visions as saying there was a shut door. And I believed it when the church said she never did. She never did. And there's instance after instance after instance of things like that. And when you read just some of these quotes from this paper by Roger Kuhn, which I think might have been it's a lecture outline. I was going to say I thought it was a syllabus to a class, but it's not, though I bet it was part of a class. because it says GSEM 534 lecture outline. And he starts it out. This is about Ellen G. White and the so-called plagiarism charge and examination of 5 issues. His first sentence of it, of all of the so-called problem issues, problem in quotes, 2 have been more successful in destroying confidence in and the credibility of Ellen G. White as a true, authentic prophet of the Lord than any others. But anyway, and then he goes on, he first talks about how a lot of the things she said about health are now a source of some mirth by certain people. And she wrote some things and she had some sources that were pretty good, but I think most people would would objectively say that she was wrong about a number of things. I don't think as a judicial officer, I hear cases. I did 5 last week of mental health hearings where people are being detained for treatment because they have serious issues, and there's always a couple of them that have talked to God, or God talks to them. Now, that doesn't mean everybody who God talks to is crazy, or needs treatment. But I've learned that you don't just take somebody at their face value if they say something happened. Christopher Hitchens, that famous atheist thinker who was very engaging, even if you don't sympathize with what he thought, I think he always made a good point when he said, I've heard him say on more than one occasion, heard him say on tape, obviously, because he's dead, is if you're riding on a bus or a subway and someone sits down next to you and turns to you and says, God told me something, God spoke to me this morning, you instinctively move closer or farther away? Every one of us would move farther away. And we're suspicious of that kind of thing. But for some reason, in this instance, we lay down our skepticism and just accept it and say, well, and even when we find out that they lied to us about certain things, we still accept it. And that's, I get, if that's what, I don't want to be too hard on people who take that approach, because my experience is different. If it gives you comfort and you find her work helpful, go to it. That's wonderful. But don't condemn the rest of us who have major doubts and think that she is that she was not inspired and that she lied.
Yeah, and that Emmanuel, the interview I'll be doing with him Thursday my time, Wednesday 5:30 p.m. LA time, we'll be able to chat about his journey. And I'm pretty sure, Emmanuel, you've mentioned that you became an Adventist. When you're a 5th generation Adventist, you've been sold this stuff all your life. When I read Walter Ray's book, The White Lie, I had to stop within a few pages. I think I started reading it in 85 or 86 or something, because of the way we'd been told. Now, you will then say, well, that doesn't make her wrong or right. But in evaluating Fred Veltman's study, we're finding that this rabbit hole runs deep. And in many ways, we're not sitting here in judgment of that. We're just reading what the evidence is. And yep, I have a bias. I'm open to that, but I'm also open to being wrong. Let me just read what Emmanuel has said in a much nicer voice. Fred Simmons has put here, I think that her voice has never been recorded. I would like to hear her give a speech, then compare it to Hitler's oration. I don't think we were orating it in a Hitler tone. But here, let me just read this without any affect. This is her letter to, who did we say it was to again?
Jane Andrews? Or is that somebody else?
Yeah, and this is, I think this is to Jane Andrews. If I'm not sure, I think so. Yeah, it is. I was shown that you made a mistake in starting to Europe without a companion. If you had, before starting, selected you a godly woman who could have been a mother to your children, you would have done a wise thing, and your usefulness would have been tenfold to what it has been. Letter 1, 1883. There we go. read nicely. But
Yes.
I'd be sitting there going, my goodness, I'm at the end of my life. I could have been tenfold more effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, just a quick thing, Michael C. Hey, Peter, come on, man. That looks like a paid audience in your opening music. I assure you, Michael, I was paid, not them.
Yeah. You were paid. All right.
Yeah, I got paid for that audience to come and get excited. And yeah, definitely not me paying the audience. I'd be broke if I paid that many people. But thank you, Michael. Michael, why don't you come on the show? You seem to run and hide whenever I ask you. At least Emmanuel has accepted the challenge. What about you, Michael? Michael C., come on the show. Okay, back to Fred Veltman.
I took up the challenge. Somebody in the chat said, "What, copying from Foy? That's not reasonable," or something along that line.
I think someone said that it wasn't in early writings.
Oh, it may not. I don't know if it's in early writings or not. But
you're talking about your love of her earlier writings, including early writings.
Oh, I loved early writings. What I think, well, because she would relate how she had these wonderful visions, and it was just that it was thrilling to me. I don't know if that was an early writing, so I think that might have been one of the visions that she copied. I just did a quick little search, and I can't see where I can copy and paste the link to it, but I just did a search, Ellen White copy vision, and put Foy, and there's a reference to it, and I saw, this isn't the one where I saw line by line comparison. And that's what I would like to find. I'll see if I can find that and post it, provide it to you tomorrow, Peter, because I think it's
demonstrably, you can demonstrably prove that she was hugely influenced by those around her. Like if something dovetailed with what she believed, she'd have a vision about it. I struggle to find any vision she had that was predictive. They all seem to be confirmative visions, and so she'll hear a Foy or a Hiram Edsom or someone about the shut door, and it comes out in a vision soon after. Very rarely is it beforehand. In fact, I can't find any predictions she's ever made.
And there's another. I was reading something about a speech she gave, a sermon she gave in Battle Creek, and there was some controversy going on, and she recounted a vision she'd had a couple of years earlier that she had forgotten about completely, and it came back to her at that moment. This vision she had had a couple of years earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's interesting. I'm not sure what it says. I'm a little skeptical, but I could see where people who have faith in her gift might say, "Oh, how wonderful!" So
yeah, there's one I can think of where she was at a meeting and there were two guys there, and she said, "Oh, I saw that they would be here, a while back." And when she was at the earthquake in San Francisco, she said, "Yeah, I saw this in vision a little while back."
Yeah. And the church gives her credit for predicting it, but she predicted it after it happened, or said she had predicted it.
Yeah. Peter Mashenko writes, "Hey, Peter, glad you're watching. Are you able to talk more about the shut door issue? We'll probably do a whole episode on the shut door. There's a lot of bits and pieces here and there about it. I can't remember who I interviewed, but they'd done a lot of research, and you can definitely see where the church, when you find original writings about the shut door, which essentially is saying that if you didn't accept the William Miller view, you were shut out of heaven. Let's all be good. Jesus is coming back any day now. They had to change that. And where she had admitted to believing in it, a lot of that stuff's been, is it expunged? Is that the right word? From those books. And I remember, I think Steve Daly said that regarding the shut door vision, something like 39 parts of that original vision have been taken out. So good question, Peter, and we will come to that definitely down the track, maybe in one whole interview with someone about that. John Den has written, "Hey John, glad you're watching. The church is indebted to Veltman, but he has essentially been ignored. It has essentially ignored his valuable research. Honesty is stranger to many. Yeah, that's true. Very well said. And maybe let's just hold up that book again of, because some people have just joined, the summary book. This is a great way for people to keep this Veltman study alive in a very brief 240-page kind of manner. You can read that and learn all about it. It's available online.
Yeah, it's very, very readable. Perhaps it would be helpful to go back to scripture, and in Joel 2:28, I think it says, it shall come to pass afterwards that I will pour out my spirit on one woman. Your daughter will prophesy and nobody else will, but don't worry, they'll be in a state to keep track of everything she wrote. Maybe that isn't what it says. It says that it seems to imply that many people will do that, but the church has said, nope, that gift was given to one person and one person only. And there were a few who tried to ascend to her mantle, but it didn't work out very well. So,
what's the name of the lady Rice? When Ellen White was in Australia, someone Rice kind of began prophesying and became quite popular while Ellen was away. I can't remember her name. Someone will share that in the comments.
Yeah, I certainly don't know that. Just interest's sake, talking about how Marian Davis had searched through scrapbooks and articles trying to find things that she could adapt to use in the Desire of Ages. One thing she wrote, she said, one thing I would prepare to do to save copying would be to buy 2 sets of testimonies and cut them up. The time I now spend in hunting over articles and with meager results is simply astonishing. So again, she deserves an awful lot of credit. And it says, a woman named Alice Gregg claims that Marian Davis didn't limit her search to the work of Ellen White, and that she used Edersheim, Hannah, Harris, March, Melville, and other various Adventist ministers. But Veltman didn't, I think, rely on anything that Gregg had done. So anyway, let's see what else. I've already talked about the fact that Veltman said that Marian Davis felt free to expand or abridge the text according to her best judgment. He said, we got some idea of how the assistants developed the final text of the Desire of Ages by examining a 1-volume work we have called a working manuscript of the Desire of Ages, chapters 2 to 37. And its original pages consisted of material from an earlier version, and revised sheets were pasted to these earlier pages. And their interlinear emendations appear between the lines of the last version. And one can trace the shifting and reworking of paragraphs and the changes in chapter titles. Sometimes Desire of Ages follows the earlier material, other times the later, which doesn't speak to inspiration or not, but it's an interesting relaying of how it was actually done. We often, I think, have this idea that someone sits down and just kind of, it flows from their pen, and they it just work one chapter at a time, and that's not how it was done here, which doesn't, again, speak to for inspiration or not, but it's a little surprising to the uninitiated. It's a little bit like going to a slaughterhouse and watching how it's done. It's a little off-putting. It's a little different than you imagine. That doesn't mean it's that how it was done was bad. It's just different. It's not what you thought.
Yeah. And in fact, it's quite commonly done in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is the artist is not claiming that it came directly from God, and the artist is not going out of their way, or the author, to suggest that they don't partake of the influences of the other sources.
Maybe that's what George Harrison should have claimed. Is that he was inspired.
Yeah.
And in a sense, songwriters are in an odd sort of way.
Well, most songs in the contemporary world are 3 chords. You've got 7 main notes, 12 notes altogether. In fact, you can't copyright chord sequences because it's impossible to write songs that you haven't copied the chord sequence. It's the mixture of the chord sequence with a slightly different melody and lyrics that make it unique. But there are chord sequences, like for example in the blues, that everyone plays the same chord sequences. I just want to show Mark Anthony has just said would be great to show a split screen evidence. I'll just quickly show where he can find that. Go online. I don't know how hard it is to get this book, but the White Lie there, Mark Anthony, go and buy that online, and it is filled with a kind of a split screen equivalent, where he has on one side the works of one author and the other side the works of the other. It's very hard to get these books. I've actually got about 4 copies. I'm happy to sell those copies. If you're interested, write to me. Yeah,
that's what I've got here. I've got a hardbound version, and
that's the White Lie.
Yes, the White Lie. It's got page just like yours, page after page. I mean, it's a very substantial amount of the book. By no means all of it, but it's a large part of the book. There.
Michael C. has said, right, Peter, you just said it. You can't copyright the gospel. I didn't say that. What are you saying? Anyway.
Well,
like the blues. Right, like the blues. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not. What are your thoughts there on I love the apologists often go to the Bible. Well, the Bible, gospel writers copied from each other.
Well, I have some ideas about that. I'm not sure this is where we want to hear them, but it seems to me that I didn't develop my view of the Bible originally by studying it or not having any particular knowledge of it. I learned to respect it and to believe in its inspiration because I was told to by my mother, by my Sabbath school teachers, by every minister, and by school teachers. It's most people who believe in the Bible do so by presupposing that it's true, by presupposing that it's the Word of God, because, well, very, very few people, in my experience, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen ever, but study the Bible and come in a scholarly way and come away with it. Hey, this is clearly the Word of God. There probably are some who do, but the vast majority do because they've been told it's true and they presuppose it's true, and they presuppose that it is the Word of God. And there are, for every wonderful verse, and there are many in the Bible, I can probably read 1 or 2 that's disgusting and horrible. And you think this is the Word of God? That gives me some trouble. But that's not what this is about. Here's an interesting thing from the Great Controversy: a page from one of the books she borrowed from, and the same picture in her book.
It's incredible. It
was just incredible. Sort of felt free to do that, and that apparently she thought that was fine, though I'm not clear why they denied that she was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible red flag again. Hey, just a quick thing back to Michael C. You can copyright the blues. You can copyright this music. I didn't say you can't copyright the blues. I said you can't copyright chord sequences. But when you add lyrics and melodies, they become copyrightable. You've then added, Michael, No, you gave an example of music. All I meant was to take that argument over to E.G. White. You use the argument for the blues and music you copy, but don't use the same principle. I do use the same principle. The thrust of what she writes, ebbs and flows, influences from others, that's totally fine. You can't copyright that. But when you write it in certain ways that allude to the previous song so clearly, you can copyright that.
Well, well, when you write a song, or when you if somebody points out to you that you borrowed that chord from, and frankly, you see there are a lot of melodies in modern music, even rock music, that borrow melodies from classical music, uncopyrighted classical music. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, those are some of the most beautiful melodies. The problem would come is if you claim you didn't borrow it from that.
That's right.
And you came up with that on your own, or that God gave it to you.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
That's right.
It's not the copying. It's not the first act. It's the cover up of it. That's the problem. So,
and if you look at, for example, the chord sequence to Sweet Home Alabama, the chord sequence to Hey Jude, those chord sequences, the chord playing underneath in the particular order, are in hundreds of songs. So there is leeway to copying, borrowing, getting inspired by material that has gone before you. But like you just said, once you start claiming it's from God and denying that you had I wasn't influenced by that group at all, I just wrote this song and I wasn't influenced at all, that's where the cover-up comes in. Emmanuel says, did she cover it up?
Yeah. Listen to what James White said. That I read that very early in it.
Yeah.
James White made that argument. She got it from God. She didn't borrow it from anybody else. And that's how we know it's true. Well, no, we don't. I see it. Fred Simmons makes a very good point. When your brother is dying, that's the time you should be confessing your own fault to him. And that's exactly right. And that's not a matter of inspiration or no inspiration. It's a matter of common decency.
Emmanuel says, how do you copyright truth as a believer in God?
Well, I don't see how one would or could or would try to. But the problem again isn't, I'm not even raising the issue of copyright. I'm raising the issue of taking somebody else's work and passing it off as your own. If you take a college class today, go to your local community college, junior college, go to your local high school, take a class there, copy somebody else's work and present it as your own. And then when the teacher catches you at it, say, God gave it to me. I didn't take that from anybody else. I had the book in my house, but I put it high on the shelf and never looked at it until afterwards. So yeah, it reads the same, but boy.
But then they have a kind of a fallacious cycle, a loop. What do they call that? Where the more they then go, well, she was inspired of God, she had every right to do that.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, she did it, and she shouldn't have done that because she was inspired, because God. Michael's saying straw man alert. That's so not a straw man. It's the fallacy that you are describing. She's inspired, therefore she can copy. And then, copying's okay because it's all from God anyway.
Yeah, and something, I could buy each and every one of those arguments without any trouble at all, except, if she would have said that from the beginning. God has given me a special ability, and he has shown me where are the gems, what I should borrow, and I borrowed those things he showed me to borrow. I might be skeptical, but at least that would be more believable than I got it all from God. But it does seem to look just like I was copying it straight out of the book. So I don't know, that I'm very troubled. And I looked up and read a presentation that W.C. White made to at PUC in 1935. And the cover-up continued. I mean, he made some grudging admissions, but it was still, you know, the old story. Somebody posted where you can find the white lie, and he's quite right. It's there. It's there. And I haven't read anything by Michael Cute. I did read a book the other day, and about it's obviously fictional, but not. A fellow who said he had been an Adventist minister, except they were Seventh-day Hussites. They weren't Seventh-day Adventists. And their prophet was a woman, and her name was not Ellen G. White, but it was an interesting. Is that who that is? Somebody said Michael Clute again. Maybe that's the stuff. Maybe that's what I read. It was kind of entertaining. So anyway, there was a Ford character in it. I can't remember what his name was.
Oh, yes, like this is the John Hackwell book.
Yes, that's it. That was the name used. I don't know if that's really his name.
Yeah, that's his name.
Is it really?
Yeah. I interviewed him a few interviews back.
Really?
And one of the most controversial interviews ever, because we talked about his art, not his book, and it offended a lot of people, and that's okay. That's what art often does.
Yeah.
A lot of people were upset, and some people might even say today that sometimes there's a bit of a mocking tone. I'm certainly not trying to bring that about. Michael says you can't compare 1800s with today. You can compare human nature from the beginning of time to today. Why can't we compare 1800s today? Maybe tomorrow, Arthur, if you could find the Connie Bearhausen story, because that certainly demonstrates that the copyright back then, they said your book is so close to ours, we're going to take legal action. So she removed it from the shelves.
I have a reprint of Sketches from the Life of Paul, purportedly by Ellen White. I'll see if I can find anything. I see if I can find that. So.
And Emmanuel has said this argument is ridiculous. It has no basis. This was all hearsay and speculation. The 8-year Fred Veltman study is not hearsay and speculation. Go and read it, Emmanuel. You've got 2 days to read it before our conversation. Michael says apples and oranges. Okay.
You can't compare 1800s with today, but the Sabbath is an eternal principle that will still be honored and worshiped in the new earth, where there is no sun and no day and night, just all day, and there is no sun, that Jesus's light keeps the whole place lit up all the time. How do you keep the Sabbath when you do that, when there's no ending of the day? But it's eternal.
Yeah. And Emmanuel, not Emmanuel, that's the wrong one I wanted to bring up. I really respect Kevin Morgan's research. He said there was no copyright on Connie Bearhausen. But am I right, though, Kevin, that Connie Bearhausen, the publisher, contacted Ellen White and said, hey, your book's too similar to ours? I'm pretty sure that's the truth.
That's what A.G. Daniels said in the 1919 Bible Conference. I think it was A.G. Daniels.
So we'll try and find that. And Kevin, tell us some more about that. I loved our interview we had. We'll do another one for sure.
And Kevin, you don't have to. Well, you're not going to be able to get a hold of. I was going to say you don't need to read all that in 2 days. You could read Trenchard's book, but if you don't already have it, you're right. It'd be pretty hard to.
Yeah, Kevin, we're not saying that. I'm saying to Emmanuel, read the Trenchard book, which is about 240 pages, and look, even just skim it, Emmanuel. You'll be fine. But you'll find that he says you've supported none of your claims with proof.
Trenchard has an interesting comment in his summary at the end. He says, I am especially intrigued by the axis of Veltman's objectivity and orthodoxy. On one hand, he forthrightly and objectively handles data and evidence. He can state categorically that Ellen White used literary sources in the production of The Desire of Ages, and even more so in the earlier stages of her related textual tradition. He clearly identifies the creative role of Marian Davis in producing the book. He points out extra biblical details in Ellen White's writings and apparent reliance on 19th century religious fictional accounts. He finds that on average, about 31% of the Desire of Ages material he examined showed some degree of literary dependence. He seems especially troubled by Ellen White's denials of literary borrowing. The next line, the next paragraph. On the other hand, Veltman is always a consummate believer. and calls for developing principles for interpreting the truths found in Ellen White's writings.
Yeah.
Veltman didn't come to this as someone to attack, and he also
he was a supporter.
didn't attack her in the end, even when he points out the reliance. He's not criticizing her.
Yeah, Emmanuel, you should read that. Don't go and read the 2,500 work, but read the Trenchard summary of it. And what Arthur just read then that's supporting the claims that we are making right there. And so when you say, seriously, it is extremely out of control, brothers. Anyway, I'm looking forward to our interview in a couple of days.
I see a comment. Michael Clute believed that God doesn't kill. He was a precious man. I don't know whether I should bring this up or not, but here's just a thought experiment. And I mentioned it the last time we talked. The world pretty much universally decries the use of waterboarding as a punishment or as torture. And waterboarding is a situation where you lay somebody back on an angle, you cover their face with a towel and pour water across their nose and mouth, and it's torture because it feels exactly as though you are drowning. And that is terrifying, one of the most terrifying things you can do. If you were God, or if God came to you about the time of Noah and said, the earth is so bad, so sinful that I'm just going to have to kill everybody except Noah and his wife and except for 8 people, I think it was. And how do you suggest I do it? Should I just drown everybody, or should I just poof them out of existence? What do you think would be the all-loving thing to do? What would you tell him? Drown them, because it'd be just like it's like waterboarding, but worse because they're actually drowning? Or we just say, you're gone.
Yeah, I know. Incredible.
And, I mean, that kind of thing troubles me. Maybe it doesn't trouble, some of our listeners. It troubles me a lot. And it's hard for me to square that with some of the things I was taught as a child. So,
yeah, they would just say, oh, well, it's not for us to question why God had a reason. Yeah. It's just, like Michael C. Peter, you think? Yeah, I do. Arthur, can you make some sense, please? Yeah, these are the what do you call them? Ad hominem attacks.
Yeah. I've been told that before.
And George has said, I hope Emmanuel will bring good, solid documentation to his interview. I'm sure he will. Yeah. Now, we've got about 5-10 minutes to finish part 1. Just wrap up a few thoughts on today's conversation, what we've been talking about, why it's important, and maybe one more little bit of info from the book. Emmanuel has just said this. I'll just bring this up because you're a lawyer. This is slander without evidence. I've read many, many words from Ellen White. I've not seen not one time where she was vicious. So we explained the vicious context before, that we were saying the Ron Numbers was said to have made vicious attacks against Ellen. And we were saying, no, there is nothing vicious in his book. Even the softened version, there's nothing vicious. And if you're going to call someone vicious by that standard, then Ellen White has made vicious comments, if that's the standard. So you're getting a bit hung up on the word vicious there. There's plenty of times that she certainly used her influence to bring about character assassination to people. Now, Kevin has said just a little bit before about the Connie Bear. Oh, here we go. And by the way, everyone, the whole point of our conversations is that they are conversations. We're not trying to put together this tight bang, 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 Fred Veltman study, boom. It's a conversation, and you guys are a part of it. So I love that Michael C. and Emmanuel and George, everyone's having a say of what they think. Great. Kevin has said, Daniel's heard it, but I haven't found any evidence of legal action. I'd love to, I've got an idea that, where is my other book? Is it Doug Hackelman? His book, Who Cares Who? I can't remember the title. I've got like 30 books. I'm going to be doing a giveaway in the new year.
I would say
Teacher
that
who talks about it.
I can't say that. Oh, here, somebody posted what. Thank you, Facebook user. Here, you posted what A.G. Daniels said about the life of Paul at the 1919 Bible Conference. And that's pretty much.
Have they posted it in the comments here?
Yes, they have.
Can you read that out?
It says, here's what A.G. Daniels said about the life of Paul at the 1919 Bible Conference. Just one more thought. Now you know something about that little book, The Life of Paul. You know the difficulty we got into about that. We could never claim inspiration in the whole thought and makeup of the book because it has been thrown aside because it was badly put together. Credits were not given to the proper authorities, and some of that crept into the great controversy, the lack of credits. And in the revision of that book, those things were carefully run down and made right. Personally, that has never shaken my faith, but there are men who have been greatly hurt by it. I think it is because they claim too much for these writings. Just as Brother White says, there is a danger in going away from the book and claiming too much. Let it have its full weight, just as God has fixed it, and then I think we will stand without being shaken when some of these things do appear that we cannot harmonize with our theory. I thought there was a little more than that. I could be wrong about that. But he points out that there was a problem with it, and they got into trouble with it, I believe. It has been thrown aside because it was badly put together. Okay. Who watches, who cares? Is that Doug Hackelman?
That's it. Yes. Who watches, who cares?
I heard Doug Hackelman make a comment on a Sabbath school discussion out of Loma Linda about 6 months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he commented that he had some real doubts about whether God exists at all. He also, Don Casebolt was at that, was the speaker at that, or the main presenter at that Sabbath school class, which was very interesting. Have you seen Father Miller's Daughter by Don Casebolt?
Read the book, you mean? Yes.
It is an excellent book.
Very good book.
And if you read that book and go away thinking that there's any basis at all for the 1844 message, you're a far wiser person than me. It convinced me completely. So
I wonder if there's a link to that meeting somewhere.
I wonder.
Yeah. While you're pondering that, Michael C. has said, Peter, do you give credit to Black Americans whenever you play the blues? If I sing a song that is written by anyone and I record it or release it, yes, I give credit and I pay royalties. What I'm saying is legally, the established legal, no one can copyright a chord sequence. You can copyright a riff. For example, Smoke on the Water, the riff. Well, I won't sing it because I might get a copyright. But the riff is able to be copyrighted. The chord sequence is not. The intro to Sweet Home Alabama, a very unique riff, that is copyrighted. I have released albums where I not only credit the artist, I credit the publisher, and I pay royalties to them. I remember releasing Knocking on Heaven's Door by Bob Dylan. His name, publisher, royalties went to Bob Dylan. So yes, I do credit, and I don't claim, hey everyone, God gave me this great song called Knocking on Heaven's Door, and so I'm releasing it. I'm not making those claims. So thank you for your questions. I appreciate it because I get to clarify.
Here's what I would.
Okay, here we go. You never have. Give proof. Let me just have a quick look while you're just talking there.
Here's what I would say to all of you out there. It doesn't bother me a bit whether you agree or disagree with me. You have to make your own way and look into your own heart and be honest. Above all, be honest with yourself. I recommend to each of you, those of you who believe in the inspiration of Ellen White and those of you who do not, to get this book and read it. And because if you continue to believe in the inspiration of Ellen White, use this book as a tool to help you develop an idea of inspiration that is consistent with the evidence. That's all I suggest. And it may very well be possible. We have seen many comments by Kevin Morgan, and he's been on the show with Peter. He's a very, very intelligent person. He's done that. He's satisfied himself that it's all consistent with the inspiration of Ellen White. And I think he's done it honestly. And I don't suggest he's dishonest at all. But he's been able to accomplish that. You can too. I hope you might be able to. Maybe you can't. Maybe you'll be like me and you can't. And Michael, the answer is no. So depends on how you define it. I think that I believe more in the actual teachings of Jesus than most Christians I know. And I'm sorry, this is off topic, but for instance, how many sermons have you heard or how many Christian financial advisors have you gone to who say, I think it's time we follow the teachings of Jesus, sell all you have and give it to the poor. And that's why you can, that's how you get eternal life. And don't worry about tomorrow. Get rid of your insurance policies. Don't worry about tomorrow. That'll take care of itself. That's what Jesus taught, wasn't it? Why am I here, Michael? Because I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah, SDAQ&A, I'm a former Adventist. Looking in from the outside is the subtitle of the program. Emmanuel, I know you're new to the program. Michael, you should know better. But I interview people that are former Adventist, current Adventist, progressive Adventists, traditional Adventists, right across the spectrum, atheists, agnostics. I've interviewed Peter Veach, good friend of mine, atheist. And I know you were joking there, Michael. Oh, that's good to see. Peter, I was just kidding. But hey, still, I want to show the evidence. And this is my album, The Outback Hippies, called Here, There, and Everywhere. I love that album cover, by the way, if I may say so myself. And on the back, you'll see Peaceful, Easy Feeling credited. People Get Ready, bunch of songs there. Knocking on Heaven's Door, all credited, all royalties paid in full.
And let me say this, I read a fair amount. Probably 90 to 95% I read is religious material, Bible stuff, books about the Bible and the Bible. And I find it endlessly fascinating. And it's why people believe and what they believe, both, are just incredibly interesting to me. My goal as a child and in my Academy Senior Annual, I'm listed as my ambition was to be a minister. This is not, it's, my wife thinks I'm crazy, but it's just something I'm very, very interested in. I listen to lots of YouTube videos while I'm working because it just, it's kind of keeps me going. And they're usually some kind of religious, usually Christian material, both pro and against. I like it. I like it. It's interesting.
And Michael has said, okay, fair enough. Emmanuel can't get over this. He said at least 3 times, wait, what? What's going on? Arthur, dear friend, are you saying you are really not a Christian?
Not as you define a Christian, but I believe in Matthew 25. And you know what I'm talking about.
And Emmanuel, are you a Christian? Is a Seventh-day Adventist a Christian? Even though some of the gospel of the third angel's message is a little bit anti-gospel, we'll be able to discuss that on our interview Thursday.
Some of my best friends are Adventist Christians. So
Yeah, exactly. And Emmanuel, we interview people from the spectrum of Adventism that you have. You'll be on the show, to people that are former Adventists, atheists, as I mentioned earlier. This is SDAQ&A, and I talk it into the conversation with all kinds of Adventists, former Adventists, etc., etc. Okay, well, you said a really good, while I was off finding the copyright proof. You said a really good little summary there. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Arthur? And we'll look forward to part 2 tomorrow, same time.
a couple things. I'll wear a shirt that doesn't get all modeled up on the screen.
What they say about TV is don't wear stripes or polka dots.
I'll try to find something that doesn't have either.
You look fine. Looks good.
Matthew 25, there's a comment by Emmanuel. I didn't understand his remarks of Matthew 25. Matthew 25, Jesus tells the story of the final judgment, when the day of the Lord. And he separates the sheep from the goats. And the sheep, he puts the goats, the ones who are lost, on one side, and the sheep, the ones who are saved, on the other. And the sheep want to know, the goats want to know why they're lost. And he said, well, no, it's the other way around. He tells the sheep they want to know why they're saved, because they didn't expect anything like that. They didn't think they were the kind of people who would be. And he said, well, I was in prison and you visited me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was naked and you clothed me. And oh boy, somebody went to school with my sister. Anyway, they said, when did we do any of that? And he said, when you did it to the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. And then those who were lost said, hold it, we were your followers. That's right, we were your followers. And he said, but you didn't do those things. So depart from me.
Mm.
And that's when I say I believe in Matthew 25. I don't think it matters one whit what you believe. I think it matters what I think the only thing that matters. And if there's a God that's worth anything, then he cares about how we treat other people. Not thought crime, not because I might think differently than someone else, or differently than a religious leader of some kind. So I'm satisfied with that. I let me tell you how much I worry about being lost. How much do you worry about going to the Muslim hell? That's how much I worry about the Christian one. So that's my view. But I respect people who sense a communion and a relationship, that they feel something, a sense of God and a relationship to God. I tried for years, prayed and prayed. I couldn't achieve it. I asked for it, couldn't get it. And if you were able to, good for you. Really, I think that's a great thing. And so that's where I come from. That has nothing to do with Fred Veltman, except that I could say Fred Veltman appeared to me as I read this material to be a true blue believer.
Yeah.
And that he was not writing this in any way to undermine her.
No.
He was given a job, and he said the desire of ages may be mostly derivative.
Yeah.
But that does not deny its originality or portray her as slavishly dependent on literary sources. So he's still trying to rescue her, even though he says it's mostly derivative.
Yeah.
So if you're going to have an honest view of her, an honest view of her inspiration, you need to get there.
Yeah.
Because if you're not, you're fooling yourself.
Yeah. Isn't that incredible? That last little phrase he said, mostly derivative.
Yeah.
And I'll read what we started with, that even though he says that, and the Adventist Church leaders know that, in their public statement, they still said, and I'll try and read this without any kind of, desire to make it sound bad in any way. The 8-year study of Ellen G. White's possible borrowing of materials from other writings for her book, The Desire of Ages, ended this year, with researcher Fred Veltman concluding that her book does contain some ideas and phrasing similar to those of other writers, but that it is independent of verbatim borrowing. And yet he says, can you read that quote again?
He said, The Desire of Ages is mostly derivative. So if you're using something as an outline, as you write several other writings as an outline to put together your book, you're derivative.
Yeah.
You're derivative. So I'll try to see if I can pull things together a little more tomorrow, though I like free flowing discussions.
Yes.
It's fun. It's very, very fun. I have a question, because I see some questions about being born again, and way off topic.
And just Michael, yes, of course.
There are four Gospels, the three Synoptics, and the Gospel of John. Where in Matthew, Mark, or Luke is being born again mentioned? Can anybody tell me that?
Can you say that again?
Where in Matthew, Mark, or Luke is being born again mentioned? Because I could be wrong. I haven't done a study of this. My recollection is that's only in the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
If it is that important, why isn't it in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Kevin, I think, is suggesting I'm wrong about that. Maybe I am wrong. But that's my recollection. It's all through the Old Testament and New Testament. Where in Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
Yeah.
Come back tomorrow night and tell me where.
Yeah. And just bringing out what Kevin said, what would it look like if it were largely non-derivative? Would it resemble any of the Gospels? That's not even really the point. The point is the claim that it is non-derivative. Whether it looks like the Gospel, maybe it would have.
Kevin points out it's only in John 3, and I think he's right about that. That's my recollection. I haven't done a study with that in mind, but I've read it. I've read those materials a lot.
I just listened to a podcast on that very topic the other day, and that was the claim. And then you suddenly go, really?
Yeah.
And then you realize that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I've just got to bring these. They're so funny. So we're watching a man that rejects Jesus' statements about being born again, but only accepts Matthew 25. Hey, look, you can be anyone on the planet and read Fred Veltman's study and make an assessment about it. You don't have to be a born again Adventist to do that. Well, and as you said, we'll come back tomorrow, and very much looking forward to our discussion. I've really enjoyed our talk today, particularly, as we said, it's conversational, and we love having the comments and whatnot. Tomorrow we'll spend the first hour not really addressing any. We'll ignore a lot of the comments. They can get a bit sidetracking. So if you do have questions and comments, just keep in mind that towards the end of tomorrow's interview, we'll be bringing them onto the screen. So, yeah, any final thoughts, and we'll bid you farewell for this evening.
Well, I will. I'll spend some time reviewing some more of the materials, and including some more of the material from that there isn't necessarily in Veltman's, but I think Veltman is the key to this, and I think there's some value in quoting some other people who I consider to be faithful Adventists, and I think most of you would too, in the introduction to the book, who give kudos to Trenchard for his work, his yeoman's work that he's done in putting this summary, this condensed version together. So many I've read when I was young. I used to like to pick up Reader's Digest condensed books and read the book. I don't like reading condensed books anymore. Haven't for a long time. This is maybe the exception. This is a condensed book that is well worth reading, and I commend it to all of you, because I think that you, whether you're a believer in Ellen White's inspiration and calling of God or not, you need to address it. You need to come to grips with it. And if you can come to grips with it, as Kevin has, and say, I have confidence in her gift, more power to you. I respect Kevin. I've watched him on Peter's show. I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
But you can't just ignore it. You can't ignore it. It's there. It's like if you have a big wart on your nose, you can pretend it's not there, but it's there.
Yeah. And we'll close by just bringing back onto the screen that book, because I think a big takeaway from our discussion today is go and check out this book if you really want to go deep without having to go into the 2,500 page version of it. Do yourself a favor. I don't know if it's available on Kindle. I love buying. Oh, there is a Kindle.
It is. It is. Yes. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, which you pay, I think in the US, I think it's $9.99 a month or something. You get it and several other books for free. There I see below Farmer Miller's Daughter. And
I bought that one. There's another book he's got out too, that guy.
That's very similar to that.
Yeah.
And I can't think of the name of it.
He'd be great on the show too.
Oh, I think he would be. I would love to see you get him on the show.
I'm going to go and buy that Veltman book right now and read as much as I can of it before tomorrow.
Now, that quote from A.G. Daniels in the 1919 Bible Conference, that seems a little stronger than what I remember just seeing, where it says that they were liable to make the denomination trouble because there was so much of that in that. Let's see. Yeah, there was so much in that their book put into the life of Paul. But anyway, there were charges made of plagiarism, it says. That's what A.G. Daniels says. I wasn't there, and I don't know if A.G. Daniels was there. But he was the president of the General Conference for a very long time. He knew Ellen White personally, knew her pretty well. And I would trust him. I would trust his tale or his take on it more than I would a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Arthur. I have loved our discussion, and I look forward very much to part 2 tomorrow. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Go for it. We love all the comments, whether you agree or disagree. Go for it. Kevin even just says, he says that Arthur Daniels didn't get it right, unfortunately. So let's look into that tomorrow. Maybe Arthur, you could message me a link to confirm that Arthur Daniels got it wrong, A.G. Daniels. But here's a great thing that Fred Simmons has just written: mercy trumps law. And I think you were alluding to that yourself, Arthur. You'd rather see people treating each other fairly and kindly and civilly, which by and large, I think most people do on this show anyway. So thank you. Those watching, look, please lean forward if you're watching on YouTube and click that like button, click the subscribe button, the notifications. And if you've got a couple of pence, a couple of dollars that you'd like to throw my way to maybe buy me a coffee, you can go to paypal.me /Peter Dixon Music. It really helps because I'm now doing 2 interviews a week. Spending a good 6-7 hours on SDAQ&A. I love it. But I do have to still feed my children and keep the roof over our heads. And as this is becoming more and more the main part of my work, that those donations really help. Thank you so much. One last quick plug. Stephen Beagles, who has helped set up this Adventist Gospel Network. Go to adventistgospelnetwork.wordpress.com. We're trying to link together a lot of Adventists that have a real sense of a kind of a progressive Adventism. We're getting them to talk to each other. Okay, well, time to go. Thank you again, Arthur. Look forward to tomorrow when we have this chat again.
Come loaded for bear, folks.
Yes, come loaded with quotes. So we and references. We want references.
Yeah.
We will too.
All right.
See you later.
Bye-bye.